Sometimes a single, absolutely catastrophic event happens, and it just pulls back the curtain on a much, much bigger story. Today, we're looking at a devastating flood in Libya that, believe it or not, reveals a hidden global crisis in how we think about water itself. Water. It's the foundation of everything, right? But it's so easy to forget its immense raw power. In September of 2023, the city of Derna, Libya, got a reminder of this in just the most brutal way imaginable. Over 11,000 people. That's the estimated number of lives lost. It's a staggering, heartbreaking number that just immediately makes you ask one question. How? Well, the immediate cause was a storm of historic proportions. It overwhelmed and then broke two critical dams just upstream from the city, and that sent a literal wall of water tearing through its center. But, as you're about to see, that's just the beginning of this story. So, to really get the bigger picture, we first have to zoom in and understand the specific failures that led to the Derna disaster. Because the thing is, the disaster in Derna wasn't just about a powerful storm. This wasn't some simple act of nature. It was the predictable, tragic result of multiple failures all overlapping at once. Researchers from the United Nations University, they dug into this, and they found what they called a recipe for human disaster. It wasn't one thing that went wrong, it was a cascade. And this really lays out the three core ingredients perfectly. First, the dams themselves were old and falling apart. Second, decades of political instability meant nobody was maintaining them. And then you have climate change, which acted like a massive amplifier for the storm itself. Now, check out this data. Satellite imaging showed the dams were literally sinking into the ground unevenly at a rate of up to 2.2 millimeters every single year. The warning signs were all there. In fact, a UNU report had already sounded the alarm on the global risk of aging dams 2 years before this one collapsed. It was a ticking time bomb.
All right, let's zoom in on that third ingredient for a second, the climate amplifier. Because this is where the story of Derna connects to a much bigger global pattern that affects all of us.
So, what's the deal? Why does it feel like we're seeing more and more of these record-breaking storms? Well, the answer really lies in some pretty fundamental physics.
It all comes down to a scientific principle called the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. I know, it sounds super complex, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple.
Okay, here's the simple version. For every single degree Celsius that our atmosphere warms up, its ability to hold water vapor goes up by about 7%. I want you to think of the atmosphere like a giant sponge. As it gets warmer, that sponge gets bigger, and it can soak up way more water. So here's the crucial part. When that bigger, wetter sponge gets wrung out, it doesn't just rain anymore, it pours. This intensification of the water cycle means way more moisture gets pulled from the oceans, just waiting to be dumped on land in these extreme, catastrophic events.
And this, right here, brings us to the most surprising, and honestly, the most critical part of this entire story. It's not just about how much it rains anymore, it's about how it rains. Now you'd think, right, that with all this extra intense rainfall, our water problems would be solved. I mean, more rain should mean more water for our rivers, for our lakes, and especially for our underground aquifers. But is that what's actually happening? Well, not so fast. Research that was published in the journal Water Resources Research looked at decades of data on rainfall and groundwater levels, and they found something completely counterintuitive. What they found is fascinating. You see, long, gentle rains are fantastic at refilling our underground water reserves. The water has time to soak deep down into the soil. But those short, intense downpours? Most of that water just runs right off the surface, causing floods and erosion, and it never even reaches the aquifers down below. Okay, so let's put the pieces together. We know from the basic physics that a warmer world is creating more powerful, more concentrated storms. And now we know from the hydrological data that those are exactly the wrong kind of storms for refilling our most critical freshwater sources. We are getting more rain, but we're actually keeping less of it where it really counts. This forces us to look at our world in a totally new way. The spectacular disasters we see on the news are actually deeply connected to a silent crisis that's happening right beneath our feet. So the Derna flood, a tragedy of too much water all at once, and the slow, steady depletion of groundwater all over the world, they aren't separate problems. They are two symptoms of the exact same fundamental shift in our planet's water cycle. As Professor Kaveh Madani of the UN University puts it, we can't just keep patching things up. We need a complete rethinking.
what he calls a holistic infrastructure healthcare approach. Basically, we need to start treating our infrastructure like a living system, building it to be resilient in a world with a volatile climate and, frankly, unstable politics.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? First, the old rules are out the window. We just can't plan our cities and our farms based on last century's rainfall. Second, we have to start paying attention to the intensity of storms, not just the total rainfall amount. And finally, we have to get ready for a really weird, paradoxical future, one where we have to manage devastating floods and creeping, invisible droughts at the exact same time. And that leaves us with this profound challenge. As climate change alters the very way that it rains, our entire relationship with water has to change with it. The question is no longer just about managing a resource, it's about learning how to survive its new and dangerous extremes,